So, Chi, hello.
Hey, how are you, Vlad?
I'm good. And I'm saying, is it Chi or she? How should I be saying it properly?
Just Chi, just
Okay.
CHI, like Chi.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's good to know. So, first of all, could you just start with a name check who you are and kind of what you are, if that makes sense?
Okay, my name is Chinyere Nnadi. I go by Chi because it's a lot easier to pronounce. And I am, I guess you would call me a social impact entrepreneur from Nigeria. And I don't know what else to say. I see a
Okay.
problem,
That's
solve
good.
it.
We'll get there in the call. And because of the accent, so uh, uh, you live in Nigeria mainly. I think I've caught you in Switzerland, but you're from the US, or you went to college in the US.
Right. So I'm a third culture kid, right? So I grew up in Nigeria. I grew up in Canada. I grew up in, childhood was in Nigeria and Canada. Uh, After puberty was America, and in Florida. And then I went to college at UCLA.
Okay.
Yeah. And currently, I'm fulfilling the dream of being a third culture kid by living in three different cultures. So what that means is that I live in New York. We have an office in New York, and then I also live in Nigeria as well. So we have an office in Nigeria as well. So it's just, yeah, we
Yeah,
just live.
you're all over. So one of the things is probably what gives you the insight, seeing different cultures. I think one of the problems with tech is people from one culture trying to put solutions on another, but that's not what this conversation's about. Look, I won't go into what the movie is. You know what it is. I think you kind of know the drill of where we're at. So first of all, tell me what you're working on right now. Why are we having the conversation? Actually, no, before we do that, if
Yeah.
anyone recognized you, you've done some TV stuff, haven't you? You've done some MTV, is that right?
Yes, my first job out of college was as a VJ for MTV, and which is interesting because
And that was in the US?
that was in the U.S. That was for a new network that MTV was launching when I was a senior in college called MTVU. It has now become like a mainstream network, but I was an original VJ, part of the original VJ class.
Okay.
Happened the senior year of college. Halfway through senior year, I got a call out of nowhere from an executive at MTV, and they asked me if I wanted to come and audition. It literally came out of the blue. It was a Saturday morning, out of the blue. And so I went and auditioned, and by the time we hit spring break, I was in New York City working for MTV as a VJ.
Wow.
But it was a really easy transition because I studied theater and film in college, and I produced and hosted a television show in college. So
Okay.
that's how they found me, actually. So
Ah, okay. That actually makes even more sense. So I used to work for MTV Europe and I had to help train VJs. And I
yeah,
think a lot of the ones we found were my bosses. My bosses were all female. Were basically cute boys they picked up on like the ski slope or somewhere, and then they were like, "Vlad, do you think we're okay hiring him? Is he? Is he?" Anyway,
yeah, it was
that's another story for another day. So
absolutely.
tell me what your projects are right now, because I know you're working on I first came across you. I think I was listening to a documentary on the on BBC Radio, BBC World
Yeah.
Service, and I think I heard about your project. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm from the Niger Delta in Nigeria, going back. I like to say thousands of years on both sides, but I know, meaning I have an uncle who's actually written the history of my family going back 300 years on both sides. Know all the stories and everything, and so I spent a lot of my childhood there and going back, and I didn't understand as a child why we were so impoverished there, even though all the oil in the country that funded the entire country, one of the largest oil producers in the world, came from our area. But our roads, that's the thing that really gets you. It's the little things as a kid. You're like, why are the roads so bad? But they're not bad in other parts of the country. And then as it got older, you begin to realize that, we're the oil pollution center of the entire world. We've had basically the Exxon Valdez oil spill, that amount, every single year in the last 50 years. And it's never, ever been touched or cleaned up or even attempted to be cleaned up.
So why is that? What's the background?
Well, it's so interesting now. We're sitting here talking with video conferencing, but these things were taking place, and there was a lot of neglect by the powers that be. I don't know. These pipelines are over 50 years old. Pipelines are supposed to be changed out every 25 years. In fact, some of the first spills started in the 70s, about 20 years into those pipelines being there. So a lot of it was neglect. And then once we hit the 90s and these problems had become so widespread, there became a groundswell of they call it militancy, but agitation by the communities, because you've grown up with 2 generations now of massive oil spills and nothing's being done about it. So then there became the agitation, and the agitation led to illegal oil. It's called bunkering, like bunkering in the forest, and
that's like you stealing oil from the pipeline.
Stealing oil and illegal refining, refinery of oil, and
so it's not. I always assumed it was just people stealing, like subsistence farmers stealing from themselves. It's actually for business.
Oh, it's a very big business. It's a really big shadow business. I'm talking, when I say big business, I mean the technology it takes to actually break into those pipelines. You need funding, you need investment, and then you break into pipelines. The young men, they steal barrels and barrels of oil. They fill up barges, take them down the rivers, sell them to China, sell them to Norway. So it's black market oil. Or they trade it for Russian weapons. I mean, it's a real life business. And for these young men, it's the only job in town, right? And then you have 1 or 2 sort of leaders or business people, elites, who are running the whole racket. And so it's a really complicated problem, and it's partially the government and partially the oil and gas companies and partially the elites. So I saw the problem, and I came at it from a scientific point of view, actually, because my mother's an environmental engineer, and she was, when the BP oil spill was happening in America in 2010, that affected Florida. So she saw what was happening in Florida, reminded her of back home, and started a task force to find better solutions to clean oil spills. And I was home one Christmas, and she showed me this biotechnology that finds oil, destroys it, and then excretes oxygen, and starts, which activates the ecosystem. And in 30 days, the oil's gone, and everything starts going back. The flora and fauna start going back in 30 days.
Is this biotech, that sounds amazing, but is this biotech that works on water? Does it work on land? Does it work on both? Because I know it's different.
Yeah. It works on water. It works on land. It works on water. It works in land. It can be operated and applied by local people because it's purely an organic solution. Meaning, like even the mangroves can be literally washed by the local people. Meaning, a mangrove that can be saved. A lot of them are.
Is it manufactured or is this grown? This tech?
It's grown in a lab using microbes. It's actually registered with the Food and Drug Administration in America.
All right, so it's more than yeast or something weird like that. It's actual. Okay, all right. Bioengineered chemical.
So like the very idealistic young side of me, I was 28 at the time. Was like, oh, okay, all right, we solved the problem. Let's just take this back. We'll give this to the powers that be, and now here's the solution, guys. Solve this. And my whole thing was, let's beat the resource curse, because Nigeria is the largest country in Africa economically and by population, and right now has 180 million people, 180 to 185, and it's projected to have over 750 million by the end of the century.
Wow.
Yeah, and be the 3rd largest country in the world. The average age is 18. So I'm sitting there at 30 thinking, okay, population's so young. The majority of the country is younger than me. There's about to be an explosion of population. I know my own people. We haven't thought ahead to figure out how we're going to solve this problem. We need to come in, and then we're an oil and gas producing country. We need to start setting down certain infrastructure, health infrastructure, education infrastructure, jobs infrastructure. When you start thinking about the future, we need to start getting agriculture going again. You know, and the Niger Delta is it's one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in all of the world, the largest wetland in Africa. So for me, it was very simple. Okay, here's a scientific problem. Let's clean this up. This is some of the most arable land on the planet. Let's get everybody farming. Let's kind of head off what's coming, sort of thing.
Okay, so just help me paint a picture then. So the Niger Delta is the bit by the sea where Lagos is?
So Lagos is also an island on the sea. The Niger Delta is, if you look in as a picture of Africa, the kind of armpit of Africa,
okay.
Literally where it meets, where the water, the delta, where the water comes in, that's the Niger Delta. And so it's very fertile. And okay. I mean, it used to be the #1 producing area for palm oil at a time.
All right, so unlike a lot of places, it's very blessed. It's blessed with great land. It's blessed with resources. Yeah. So help me, before I dive into what you're doing then, help me just paint me a picture of, so there are some challenges out. I'm guessing it's corruption. I'm guessing it's ineptitude. I'm guessing it's a bunch of things. I don't know if you need to deal with these people, so I'm not going to push you on.
Well, I like to think about what is corruption really? You know, corruption is usually, in the case of the Niger Delta, the corruption is money's only coming into these communities one way. And it's coming through a lot of filters before it actually hits the ground, right? And if there's only one source of money, meaning there's only one game in town, there aren't any other industries. Well, the way you get, like there's a saying in Nigeria, be nice to everyone, because that guy sleeping on your couch one day could wake up and become a multimillionaire because his childhood friend gets an oil block. And, you know, it all comes down to oil and the government, and that's essentially the issue. And that's been my goal, to solve that, to bring economic development by bringing other industries or other industries and other pools of capital, other sources of capital into those, to develop those communities. Because that's corruption is just, you basically, if you're a young man and you're trying to get on, you've got to align yourself with the person who's closest to the spigot. And now everyone's fighting to be closer to the spigot. So if you own the spigot, right, and you're a wealthy elite, there's also a wealthy elite who doesn't own the spigot, right? So he's going to attack that guy. So it's just young people looking for opportunity and nowhere to express themselves.
All right. So what you're trying to do as well, then, it sounds like, is not kind of do charity work. It's trying to create a sustainable business that has social impact, that changes people's lives. Okay. So look, I understand where it is. I understand there's a lot of pollution everywhere. So I guess it's affecting arable land. It's affecting the forest and the kind of natural environment.
The health of people and such. The health of the. I mean, our life expectancy in Chinyere, the village we're working in, is under 40 years old. That's lower than it was when my grandfather was mayor of Port Harcourt in the 1960s. You know, we're going backward, and the neonatal deaths double whenever you're close to a spill. The health implications are massive, but it's unfortunate because they haven't really been studied, other than the UN report and universities in the Niger Delta. So folks aren't quite, I mean, you can literally be sitting there in a marketplace and it's raining, you know, because it's very marshy land, and you'll just see the water go by, and you look down at the water and it's glistening because it has oil, but you're nowhere near an oil spill.
Yeah.
You know, meaning, so it's the most fertile, beautiful red earth with just a beautiful jungle, and then someone just spilled a gigantic mess on it at the same time. Okay. So it's a really interesting contrast, and it's affecting people's health and, of course, development.
That's terrible. And Chinyere is relatively rural, or it's a bigger city, or?
Right. So Chinyere is in Gokana, LGA, local government authority. Gokana has population 250,000. It's rural. And then the major city in the region is Port Harcourt. And you have to say it that way because that's how Nigerians say it. We don't say Port Harcourt. We say Port Harcourt.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the major oil capital of Nigeria, the major city in the area.
Okay. All right. And so tell me a little bit about your project. Obviously, we're talking because I'm investigating how tech is changing the world and changing society. So, yeah, tell me about your project.
Well, so it really started. So our project started off from the scientific point of view. We can solve this problem, and then as you start pulling at the string, you realize that the real problem is there is the systemic lack of accountability. That's what created that problem. And as we've been going on this journey, trying to understand everyone's points of view, because when you've got a system problem like that, you've got to, it's like a Gordian knot, and you have to sit down with all the stakeholders because they'll never sit down in one place, right? And you have to get all their points of view and understand all of their pain points so you can kind of understand, can this problem be solved? And in that journey, I began to realize that what was needed was a digital protocol, meaning a way for all the stakeholders to have their incentives aligned without them being in the same room.
Okay. Just to make sure I understand as well, by stakeholders, I'm guessing because it's quite rural, it's a little more traditional. So we're talking about kind of tribal chiefs and important people rather than just local residents and oil companies, or who are the stakeholders?
Right. So the stakeholders of the society, you've got the local people, right? And then you've got the oil and gas elite business people. And then you've got the oil and gas, the oil and gas, these are the contractors. And then you've got the oil and gas actual companies. And then you've got the government. And all of those are points of views at looking at this problem. And right now, they're all at odds because none of them trust each other. And it was really understanding all of their points of view and how to make all of them happy, you know? Because if you can make all of them happy, then you can move forward. Because the current state is Shell or the oil and gas companies will say, we want to solve the problem, but the people won't let us in their communities. Well, you've been polluting the area for 2 generations. You know, it's not like they're just going to welcome you with anyone with open hands.
Yeah.
Men stand at the edges of these communities armed with AK-47s, thinking at any outsider coming in. Even an NGO, that's actually one of the things that really clued me into creating a digital protocol, a digital platform, is because I noticed even NGOs weren't working in the area because the Gordian knot, the antagonism had got so high that the people wouldn't even let anyone help them, you know? And so when we talk about stakeholders, we're really talking about the community, because Nigeria is a country that was created in a way that it lacks a social contract. And we believe that we can use technology to create that social contract.
So lack of social contract because it's different cultures stuck in a legal entity?
Yeah, you've got different cultures. You've got good actions aren't rewarded because there isn't organic economic growth, you know, because of oil and gas. And the different cultures is bad. I mean, if you really think about it, we've got over 570 languages in that country. It's insane. So the Gokana, the community we work in, they're Ogoni, and I'm Igbo. The Igbos are the majority in the area. And they are antagonistic to us as well, because they're a minority. They're only 1 million people, and I think we're over 40 million people.
So do they think of you as, just and as an aside, do they think of you as Igbo, or do they think of you as like American or Canadian? You have
to remind them that you're Igbo. I mean, when you sit down with anyone, you're like, you kind of have to start with your life history.
Okay.
And because you come off as American, the first thing they think is that you're with the oil and gas companies. And then you have to say, you know, my grandfather was Francis Ehekwaba, who was mayor of Port Harcourt during the Civil War. The Civil War ended in my village, Nkwere, which is just north, 2 hours north of the area. you kind of have to show your street cred, you know?
Okay, so it actually, so being a foreigner and outsider isn't good. You need to be part of, okay.
Even if you're from Senegal, it's a problem because I mean, imagine the people that have received so much pain for so long.
Yeah.
They've got their shoulders up to everybody, you know? And it's just in the last year or two, so 2016, that there's been a change in sentiment, and they've been open to actual new solutions. I'll give you an example, just quickly, one example. There was a priest in Bordeaux, which is a village that's nearby. He's from the Niger Delta. He's from the northern, around my area, actually, in Imo State. And so he was in Baltimore. He's a Catholic priest. And he came back to Bordeaux to help negotiate with 3,000 militants who were, blowing on pipelines and such. Dutch negotiators hired by Shell had tried to negotiate with them to no avail. Meaning these are youths without jobs who will blow up pipelines and terrorize the areas at the behest, even if their leaders are, the chiefs are saying, don't do it. Because they want attention, they want the problem solved, and they want money, they want money. And so he flew all the way back from Baltimore to speak with these youths and to start, he moved, from parish to the new parish of Bordeaux. And he got these 3,000 youths to lay down their weapons and stop any sort of violence and agitation. And I met with him last summer, and he said to me, now these young men are looking at me. He actually is a principal at a boys' school there. He says, these young men are looking at him, and they're saying, what next? What do we do now? And it's interesting that it took someone who was from there to come home and speak with them, and that's kind of the same with us. It's kind of the story. Like whenever we have any issues, we have to drop into Pidgin and let them know, like, look, like we're from here. We're here to help you. You can't give me a heart attack because I'm your brother. I'm here to help you. You shouldn't be trying to cause me any stress. You should be helping me help you. And so the Niger Delta is one of the hardest places in the world to work, but we're fortunate that there's more of us coming back to start to change the mindset and introduce new solutions.
So more of you coming back from the US, from UK, other places. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you painted me a picture. So tell me about your solution. So essentially you're using tech to take out personality, I guess. So like you've all done a negotiation, a treaty, and this is about kind of enforcing the treaty.
Well, so it all started with the UN report in 2011. The UN report,
tell us about that.
So there was the Ogoni land report in 2011. Yeah, 2011. And it was commissioned by the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, who was also from the Niger Delta. And it was the first time any organization had gone in and actually studied the effects of these 50 years of oil pollution. And so they studied a few villages, a few sites. Gokana was one of them. And there were areas that had been claimed to have remediated and cleaned up by the oil and gas companies and by contractors. And they went there and they said nothing has ever happened there. So they studied the health effects, they studied the environmental effects, and they gave certain recommendations. And I remember sitting there in business school looking at these recommendations and thinking, there is no way, no absolute, because the result of this report was Shell setting down a $1 billion fund to start the cleanup. I mean, this is going to be the largest cleanup of oil pollution in world history. Full stop. That's what the UN has said. And so the UN set down Shell's budget. They said, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. And I looked at that and I said, that's not ever happening because there's no will to actually make that happen.
Is the budget good enough?
Well, the budget is only for the first 5 years, and it's only for 1/6 of the entire area.
Okay, and why is there not the will?
Again, you've got the different ethnicities, right? You've got You've got the systemic lack of accountability. In fact, one of the recommendations, the majority of the recommendations were around monitoring and public reporting of progress of the cleanup. Because the problem before was hundreds of millions have been spent to do jobs, and the UN goes there and says, nothing has ever been done here. Where did that money go? So a lot of the recommendations were around public reports of the progress of the cleanup, engaging the community and making them part of the process, so it's not an elite getting a contract, hiring foreigners to actually do the work. And then this is the one that really got me, creating a healthcare database of all the affected communities. And, that's the logistical.
Yeah.
Right. And I looked at that and I was like, that's never going to happen, And then one of my first thoughts was, well, why can't we, let's just say the healthcare database, why can't we outsource that to NGOs and then they sort of aggregate the data, right? And so that's what got me thinking along that path and thinking about what took place in Haiti, the missteps around there. And I just figured, you know what, if there was a way to organize this entire process so that it's fully transparent and so that an executive at Shell can just sit there and watch the entire thing happen, and so that people all around the world and in Nigeria could just watch it meaning the public reports that the UN wants, then Shell could not be in the position to say, we're not going to do this. You've taken away all of their excuses, Shell and the Nigerian government. So that became my mission, was because I knew the technology was there. I didn't know at that time about smart contracts. This was 2015.
Okay.
And it was meeting the folks at Consensus in January of 2017. Was that last year? Yeah. That got me thinking about smart contracts. And then that really opened up, I'm a very curious person. I started looking into that and realizing, wait a second, if you're a villager or a person in the community and we've organized the cleanup and you've been part of the monitoring process, if you're a contractor, you've been part of the cleanup process, you've been part of a flow of capital. How do we take that flow of capital and that record, and then we're already making it public to everybody. That's already the goal.
Yeah.
It allows you to make it even more public. And then ideally, if you're someone who wants to, let's say, do business in Nigeria, you can now find that woman who owns a plantain farm, who decided to, because a $1 billion injection into this type of community, everyone now has jobs. Entire industries are created. If men are working, women are selling groundnuts and bananas to the multi-order effects are amazing. Well, how can we make this not just be a one-time solution?
Yeah.
How do we, money is finally come in, how do we then take those record of those transactions, that track record that of actual development, and then port that to invite more development to come in?
Okay. Well, so it sounds like it's very much a pragmatic response to problems happening around you, rather than I'm going to change. Well, you are changing the world, but it's responding to local conditions. So,
right.
So essentially you're creating a hub, a portal of information that other people deal. And this is separate from the biotech, or is the biotech kind of connected?
It's always separate. To be very direct, my dream, my goal is I want to put money in the pockets of the people in the Niger Delta.
Okay.
That's the essential problem. The current situation is that's not happening. Okay. And that's when an AK-47 becomes a good investment. Once you get the money in their pockets and people start thinking about their children and them going to school, and they start dreaming, now you have a society being built. Now you have peace. You have so much potential there, but there's no, I guess I'm just trying to find order.
Okay.
I'm just trying to find order out of chaos in a way,
All right. So let's look at what you're doing then from two sides. Tell me about it, first of all, from the view of like you're being a villager in Kadar village.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards tell me the conversation you have with like VCs and consensus about like what you're doing. So yeah, from your insider's view.
So this is I like thinking about it from the point of view of, because like when you think about a villager, you're usually thinking, oh, you know, this is just a 38-year-old woman who has young children and perhaps is undereducated. One of the things is that 38-year-old woman likely has an 18-year-old son who no longer lives in the village, who now is in Port Harcourt trying to make it. So it's funny. If you're that 18-year-old kid, okay, so before, what happened was, when the Niger Delta was clean, was that you moved to the city and your parents visited you in the big city and they brought vegetables to help kind of subsist you in the big city trying to make it. Because it's, you know, it was just fertile, and then there was so much yams, you could grow so much yams and such, and plantains, and they help subsidize you trying to economically move forward. Now, because the area is polluted, the folks in the city are now having to send money back to their parents in the village. So I like to think of it as not only the villager, but also their children, right? So if a cleanup is happening, or let's just say, for example, cleanup is happening, that young woman, she's 18 years old, can start a business will start a business to feed those men who are working on the cleanup, right? Because this is a massive project. What we say to her is, take a picture with your phone and put it on the blockchain. Well, we don't say put it on the blockchain. Text it to this number, right? And this number, think of this number as a woman named Stella. Text it to her. She's going to text you and say, how is the cleanup going? And then you take a picture, text it to her, and she'll say, thank you. And then she'll send you money to your phone. You then take your phone, you go to the guy who's selling phone credit or cigarettes or someone in the village, and then you text him the money, and then you get Naira, and then you go and buy rice, you know? Okay.
So it's actual money. And is it a micropayments, or is it, I guess you got to take a bunch of photos and that's enough for some rice or a kilo of rice or whatever?
Right, so that's the simplest way of saying it. She'll be attached to a project, and then, so she'll have a sense of responsibility of that project. She doesn't have to be there all the time, but she's attached to a specific project that's happening, and she's randomly texted to go, and then she's usually 15, 20 minutes away from it, to go and take a picture, come back, she'll go back to the market. And then once the project hits certain milestones and her data coalesces with the project going forward, because you got the whole community working together. So the contractor can't stop working. Like, everyone is accountable to each other now. And so once the project hits the certain milestones, and is progressing, she's paid per each milestone, you know? Okay. And so she now has a job. And here's just one more thing. The interesting thing is the dream, meaning like the goal for everyone in that community, what they wish is that their kid would somehow get a job working for one of the oil and gas companies. Usually the only person who gets it is the son or daughter of the chief. Okay. But now suddenly they're working with the oil and gas. If you think about it as it's like psychologically, they get a certain level of respect for themselves, because they're actually part of the development that's happening in their area. So they're working, let's say it's Shell or Chevron. They're working for Shell or Chevron, and that actually makes them happy, because that's been the problem before, is that there hasn't been any form of engagement.
It's no longer them and us, it's just us.
Yeah, and sorry, just one more quick thing about the community. Currently, so this lady has achieved a reputation in working with, let's just use Shell as a stand-in, right? And so what she can then do is think of a project that she wants to do. And then she can go on her computer or on her phone to the same portal, submit the project, meaning there'll be a project for like Shell's cleanup, right? But then there's a project that she's submitted, right? And then someone anywhere in the world can fund that project, meaning give her a loan, right? The same process happens again. Now, instead of her just being a monitor who's attached to a contractor, She's now moved up in the world, and she's now the contractor.
So you're kind of building like a credit score, a social credit score.
We like to think, yeah.
If you're a trustworthy person.
Yeah, it's like what Nigeria needs and at this level is a social contract. We don't have a social contract. We don't have a way of identifying who the good actors are, or even rewarding who the good actors are. And so, like, I work with folks in the village, and the reason you can tell from our relationship, they want to do good and they want to impress me and show that they're trustworthy, so that I can continue to work with them and they can subsist.
Okay.
That connection.
That's really interesting. Just because when I was in London Blockchain Week in London, obviously last week, and listening to a lot of NGOs, and listening to a hackathon actually, and a lot of the solutions people are offering included building trust networks and trust scores. So essentially taking random villager that had nothing, that doesn't have an electronic record, and kind of putting them on the World Wide Web, making them real for the sense of the wider world, and actually essentially giving a trust score, a credit score for a loan or for other issues. So look, I've got a couple of questions picking it up on what you were saying. You spoke before that there wasn't a social contract, and now you're saying people are responsible to each other. Can you help me understand that a little more?
Well, there isn't a social contract, but it's kind of like so if you look at Nigeria, people say oil and gas is the big industry, but it's actually the industry that's growing the slowest.
Okay.
The fastest growing industry is fast moving, goods,
okay,
commerce. And so there isn't a social contract, but there are a lot of people who want to be trusted, want to develop a reputation.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's no way of, so I know people and I trust them, but there's no way of matching them and making them visible to capital, right? Now, and you see it, they just glom onto you, and you just think, man, and they only connected to you, and the way they're connected to you is family, and then you're communicating to them to WhatsApp. They're like, this person is phenomenal. Why doesn't someone else know about this person?
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Oh, well, I was just say, so this leads into another question. I don't know if you're being kind of cruel by talking just about women a lot, or whether you're actively working more than women because this works more. Is that the case?
Here's an interesting thing. Here's an interesting thing about that is that my undergraduate degree was in theater and film, so I studied to be an artist and such. So I have a belief in things happening organically, totally organic. Because if you think about it, who's going to be working on the actual oil spill? Men.
Yeah.
Right? Who's going to monitor to make sure those men are working? Women. So they're the ones who end up developing the trust and the reputation first. And so the way I like to think about it is, even if, let's take away women and men, let's just say bad actors and good actors. The guys that I work with,
all men are bad actors. Okay, that's good.
But there are guys that I work with that are environmental activists that how do I say this? They're not gonna grab an AK-47 and get in the bush and leave their families and go live in a militant camp. They're not that guy. They're not that mindset. They want to they want the spill to be solved. They want their society to be fixed. And I'm working with these guys, and I'm like, we need to be, capital should be, value should be going, you're the one who can actually create real value in the society, And so, yes, it ends up being women, but it's also young men as well. It's just that the share of folks that will probably ideally interact with our platform and generate the most value from it will probably skew to more women than men.
Okay. I guess it's like that in a whole bunch of societies, isn't there? More traditional societies where the women keep the guys in check. Yeah. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Well, wait. I'll just say one thing. Just as an aside, this all started with my mother, right? And we've gotten into scenarios with militants they threaten our lives. And the only thing that gets an 18 to 25-year-old young man who's ready to intimidate you to calm down is an older woman telling him to shut up. You see it. They like, my mom will talk to them like she's their big auntie, and then just boom, they're done. She just checks it. Like, so you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And just out of interest, your mum sounds awesome, by the way. But, and I don't know if it makes any difference, but is she like American, or is she Nigerian or Nigerian American, or is she something completely different?
Well, so my folks, it's the fact that we spend every single Christmas going back to the village, and that's actually not very normal for most first generation immigrants, because it's actually really expensive just to bring back a family of 6 every year. But my folks, my mom and my dad, they're both from the same village, and they grew up knowing each other's families. And so to be absolutely clear, they spend 48 weeks of the year slaving, working really hard in America, looking forward to those 4 weeks in the village. So though they can appear very Americanized, at the core, they're still from the village. And that's been passed down to me. And that's why I'm doing this.
All right, no, that makes sense. Sorry, just because my folks are Polish, so I grew up being taught I was a foreigner in England, even though I was born here and lived here all my life. So, and I think it might affect the culture. So you're talking with these kids. I'm just trying to work out, does your mum get their culture? And your mum very obviously does get their culture. So,
oh yeah, just drop in the pidgin English and shut them down.
Yeah. So going round to the other side, then you spoke about meeting consensus, and you've got an office in New York. Kind of talk to me as a kind of New York entrepreneur about what you're doing and what the vision is.
Well, our vision is, when people try to attack or look at the problem of I don't even want to start with impact investing. I had a professor in business school who incepted me. He's not aware of this, but he totally incepted this idea in my head. I was sitting there in macroeconomics classes, Jeremy Siegel, and he's known as like the Wizard of Wall Street and stuff because he called the 1987 crash. And it's just this basic entry level macro class. And he said, and he always reads from his notes, so he says this every year. He said, the economic opportunity of this century is the transfer of wealth from the rich countries, the rich old countries, to the poor young countries, because the rich countries have liabilities and the young countries have productivity, right? And so that just stayed in my mind because, I'm from a very populous, young, poor country, right? But I've been raised in the richest country in the world. And I'm living in literally both extremes of it, as in the village and New York City. And so it's always been there in my mind, how can we bridge those two things? Because those two sides are fighting within me, right? So I'm always trying to bridge them, right? And so I give you an example. My cousin, who works with me in Nigeria, he's 32 years old. I told him, if I give you $1,000, if I gave you $1,000 loan, what would you do with it? And he said, well, I'd go start my auntie's farm again, because agriculture is everyone is getting into agriculture now in Nigeria. And so I get my auntie's farm again, and I would get that going so I could live off that, and then find another business to invest in and have multiple businesses going. And I said, okay, what would your return be on that $1,000? And he said, he thought for a second, and he said, I'd make $800 off of it every 3 months. And I was like, wow, that's an amazing return.
Yeah, amazing return.
And and I had another uncle who's a businessman who's also just opened up his own farm. And this is a guy who this uncle is a guy who's a politician, has built hotels, and now he's in farming. And I'm thinking to myself, there's money to me. This is before the dream in 2010 was beat the resource case. Now we're in 2011. Now we're in 2018, and it's clear as day there's money to be made in supporting small farmers. But then how do you even identify them? There's all that young entrepreneurial energy that my professor spoke about. It's there, it exists, but it doesn't have capital going towards it. So what we do is we're thinking about, okay, what capital is actually coming into these communities? It's large scale development capital. Now, how can we get these communities to be part of that flow of capital so that they can develop this sort of, develop the visibility needed to actually go and get capital for themselves? And then what we do, and this is the interesting thing about, we got a really, I've been very fortunate. Our engineers, our lead engineer, Hassan, I stole him from Uber. He was writing algorithms for driverless cars. And he's a 22-year-old kid, just graduated from MIT. And I went to meet him in Pittsburgh, and I was like, Hassan, you're writing algorithms for driverless cars. You could be writing algorithms for young men and women just like you, to help them get capital to change their lives. And he moved to America when he was 17 years old, so from Ivory Coast. So he very much understands that. And our other engineers are also from MIT, they're also 22 years old, they're also African, so they get it.
Okay.
And so you sit down with these guys and you say, okay, guys, let's get together and let's figure out how to build a piece of technology that will magnify who the high impact entrepreneurs are. And one of the ways, this is really interesting. So one of our advisors is the former CEO of HSBC Africa, Andrew Dell, really, really bright gentleman. And he had I always give credit where credit's due, a very good note for us. He said, okay, you've got an impact fund, let's say, or an NGO that's built a school. And you've made sure the school's been built. You've got the community as part of it. You've got monitoring. You know who the reputable people are. That's wonderful. You've got development. He said, take it even further. Why don't you build 2 schools? And then since you're incentivizing folks already to be reputable and to be trustworthy, meaning the more, if I send you a text to send in a picture and it takes you 5 hours, or if it takes you 1 hour, that factors into your actual reputation, right? Why not have folks compete against each other? Because if you've got a school being built in one village and a school being built in the other village, and the folks in one village get a 10% incentive, and the folks in the other village get a 50% incentive, the guys in the 10% village will look and say, what did they do better than us? And then you have people working with their minds and you're changing behavior, and you just build the tool and let the entrepreneurial energy take hold of it.
So it's gamification of development work.
Yeah, I mean, you got a population, the average age is 18 years old.
Wow. By the way, so what's this business called?
Our platform.
Yeah.
Our platform is called Sela.
Okay.
Which is ancient Hebrew, actually, for foundation, rock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because
essentially SELA.
SELA, yeah.
Okay. And so you said a lot of your team are Africans based in the US. One of the things that I've noticed, especially at the hackathon, is that old tech was very much based around Silicon Valley and more traditional universities, and especially being based out of Europe the last few months. There's people coming from different kinds of worlds. We know there's hackers in the Ukraine, but some of them are good hackers or bad hackers. Estonia is a leading light in blockchain. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff happening in Asia. Do you feel that? Is this kind of new tech also emerging from different places as people try to find solutions for their local problems, or am I just misreading the situation?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's, you know, when you're in Estonia or when you're in Europe, there's a really strong infrastructure there to really develop talent. And that's something that we want to do, because there's a lot of strong interest in Nigeria in blockchain. But like any problem in Nigeria, whether it's medicine or technology, you need to develop the local talent. That's why we're doing all of this, right? And so we're actually launching a blockchain incubator in Nigeria starting in March. And
there's a blockchain conference there soon as well, isn't there? I spotted a lady when I was at the London conference organizing it, but yeah.
That's the thing, there's so much interest, and our vision is, okay, let's take Hassan Kayode over here, who are the best and brightest at MIT, and then let's get the best and the brightest out of that intense enthusiasm in Lagos. and bring them onto our project. We're already going to need Nigerian developers anyway to hack our project, hack our platform, because you know what I mean? You got to have a red team to make sure that it will work, that the local flavor won't take you down, bring it into the process. But there's a skills transfer in what we're doing, and our goal is to develop the ecosystem so that as our project takes off, the guys that have worked with us now have the credibility of working on our project. They see the problems that they want to solve. Makes it easier. It's the same thing. It's a skills transfer. They can get funding. They can start going to solve those problems as well. And I think I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but the #1 city in the entire world for searching about Bitcoin is Lagos, Nigeria.
I didn't know that. Wow.
San Francisco is #2. You know.
Yeah.
Vienna is like 4 or 5. I mean, so there's demand there. It's just we need to develop the human capital infrastructure, which is one of my passions.
Okay, all right. And this is a slight aside, but I know there's a lot of Chinese money coming into Africa. I don't know how much you're up for it. Is that true of Nigeria and Niger Delta as well?
Well, there is a lot of Chinese money coming into Nigeria. They build our airports. My brother was actually the only Nigerian executive at the Chinese Development Corporation in Nigeria when he was living in Nigeria. Absolutely, they're building a lot of our infrastructure. But yeah, I mean that development is happening, and our hope is that we can attract more capital other than because it's kind of a dream, but like the way I see it is people are chasing yield everywhere, you know, and I don't see why they can't tap into that productivity that's right there, because the actual growth happening in the market, like the person who people really should be investing in is the guy who has a juice business idea in Nigeria. That guy, if he had money, is going to make so much money. That's the fastest growing sector, fast moving goods, because you've got a bunch of kids, you know, diapers. Like there's so much creativity, so many business ideas, but unfortunately, a high level of friction.
Okay. All right. So it seems like for Nigeria, that's good that this money's coming in. I guess with like both, I live in America most of the time. For America, it's not. It's kind of America readjusting its position in the world, not quite being so important for foreign countries the way it used to be. So, look, we've been speaking for nearly an hour, so I should probably start bringing it to a close. But I don't know. Have I asked you? Is there anything that I've kind of missed out that I should be aware of around your business, around Nigeria, around whatever else?
Oh,
or have we covered a fair amount?
Now you're asking me questions. me to ask you questions or come up with questions for you. No. I think that, I don't know, let's take blockchain, for example, decentralization, right? I actually think that that's why the hope of decentralization, let's call it that. Nigeria is actually the perfect place for it to start, because what has held back Nigeria is the decentralization of power. So just to kind of unpack that, Indonesia and Nigeria were the same place in the 1960s, along with Singapore, South Korea. I read a very interesting book in grad school about this. And basically, if you have centralized power or centralized corruption, if you're FDI, you know who to talk to when you want to get anything done in that country.
FDI?
Foreign direct investment.
Okay.
So if you're a big mining company, there's only one guy for you to talk to. You talk to the guy at the top, it trickles down, you know? But Nigeria, because of all the different ethnicities and all the different fiefdoms and all the different levels of the fiefdoms, you can't get anything done. It's the most complex market in all of Africa. And the hope of decentralization and blockchain is to rebuild the world from the ground up, right? And so that's why I believe that Nigeria is where blockchain really needs to take off, because there's a lot of value, lots of value all over the ground, right? But it's being held back by all these different levels of sovereignty and such that are just, that are totally unorganized. So if you can cut through all those different levels of sovereignty, which was impossible to do before, because you can only talk to a human, right? But now with technology, we can cut right through it. We can cut right through it and start dealing with the individual people. We can have economic growth we're in the 21st century?
Yeah.
We can have economic growth in a 21st century way. I'm serious about this because that's, I believe, the gift of blockchain. And I just hope that eventually through our project and others, that people see that, that see that that's where it's really needed and what it's meant for.
Hopefully it's kind of one of the premises of the movie, which is we're going from a way where we've MacGyvered old-fashioned ways of working onto the internet, and blockchain and the kind of AI and other new tech is just fundamentally changing how we can operate in a way that humans never could. So I get that. So look, we've been talking now, so I should draw it to a close. I will try and put this online within the next day or so, like unedited, just so it's up there.
Okay.
I'll probably go back and do edited highlights over the coming several weeks. So I'll keep talking to you. Let's keep talking by email. Let's keep talking by phone. Thank you very much for your time. It's been awesome. And yeah, let's keep talking as well about Janus and the other stuff that I've been hearing. Maybe I've got some ideas. So
yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing, because you're making a film.
Yeah.
Right? I'm looking forward to like that because that process. Documentary was what I did in undergrad, so it's a daunting process, but I'm sure you're in the middle of it and you're enjoying it, and you're about to get to the next level of enjoyment when you actually put it all together, right? So
we're getting close, and hopefully we can make the plot work. The problem is there's so many stories right now, we can't go everywhere, so it's trying to work out where the story should go, just to help people understand. Our number one priority is to help people kind of understand the nature of what is happening around that. And that's not necessarily about telling facts. It's about kind of giving an impression of how the world is changing. So anyway,
great.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a good rest of the week, and talk to you soon.